This is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to this next video lesson. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a wage calculator. And that means that the user is going to enter in their hourly wage. They are also going to enter their hours worked. When we click Submit, we want a couple of statements down here in the label area. We want to display what their regular pay is, what their overtime pay is, and then of course what their total pay is, which will be the addition of those two. So as you can see, I've named these various controls. For example, this is TXT hourly wage. This is TXT hours worked, BTN submit. As you can see over here, we have LBL result. So now I'm going to have you double click on the button, and that takes you to the code area. I don't need the properties panel, so I'm going to minimize that. Try not to close it. We'll just minimize it because we're going to bring that up in some future project. Well, the first thing that you want to do is to type in your comments. So we have declarations, get user input, calculation, output. This is in general what you will do when you are creating your program. You will always start off with these comments. So in the declarations section, you have to ask yourself, what is it that I'm going to obtain from the user, and what is it that I need to give back to the user? And so in my opinion, you just simply go back to the design. And then over here in the design, you see clearly they've got to give you these two pieces of data, and then you've got to give them this data over here. Well, it looks like I need the hourly wage and I need the hours worked. So over here, dim hourly wage as. So then the question is, what should this be? Should it be a double or should it be an integer? Well, you know how people get paid something like maybe $10.55, say for example. It's not just a whole number, it's a real number. So in this case, I'll make that a double. I also need the hours worked. So we'll say dim hours worked as, okay, now, I remember when I was working at Northrop, they would pay us every 15 minutes. So for example, if I worked 41 hours and 15 minutes, then I would be 41.25. Okay, so every 15 minutes I would get paid after every 40 hours. So in that case, I'm going to make it so that it's a double. It could very well be that someone enters a fractional answer. Yes, question?
I just noticed that the book tells you to use Hungarian notation for all the variables.
Yeah, so the question is, the question is about using the Hungarian notation for variables. So for example, over here, you might put DBL with a capital H here for hours worked. You could do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. It used to be that in the old school days of programming that you would look at programs on a piece of paper, and then you would do your debugging, go back to the computer, and change your program. And so it would be hard later on, much later on, tens of thousands of lines later, to find out what is hours worked. Is that an integer? Is that a double? And so if you put a prefix in front of it, then it makes it easy because then you can see what it is. In the newer programming paradigm, you don't do that. Now, can you do it? Yeah. Should you do it? It's up to you. I think most people don't do that because you are working on your program inside of an IDE like Visual Studio. So what ends up happening is over here, let's say that I type in hours worked. Now I'm not going to have you enter this in. I'm just giving you an example. Let's say that this top part is off screen because you are tens of thousands of lines down. All you have to do is hover your mouse pointer on top of this, and you can see through this pop-up that this thing is a double. So that's why most people don't do that now. Having said that, for the graphical portion, that is an invaluable tool to be able to use the Hungarian notation. So for me personally, I don't do it, but it's not an issue if you do. In fact, put Hungarian notation prefixes in front of the variables, that's fine. Okay, so the one thing that I need to give back to the user is their regular pay, their overtime pay, and their total pay. I think these are all the variables that I need for my program. If they are not, then I can always go back and make some adjustments. But it looks like we're off to a good start. So then if you're asking yourself, okay, Professor Solis, what do I do next? Well, go in accordance to the comments. The next thing to do would be to get the user input. So at this point, then I'll just simply obtain what the hourly wage is, and that's going to be convert dot to double whatever is inside of txt. Okay, I'm going to stop right here. You'll notice that when I type in txt, I have a listing. Well, I want the hourly wage, so that's obviously going to come from txt hourly wage dot text. It's the text from this text box that you are converting into a real number and assigning that into hourly wage. We're going to do the same thing with hours worked. So hours worked, again, I'm going to convert to double whatever is inside of this text box, and again, I'm going to stop right here. All I do is type in txt and then look for the hours worked text box. That's going to be this one here. So I double click it, dot te, and in fact I don't have to keep on typing. Text is already selected. I can just simply double click on that. And so now I have obtained the data from the user. Yeah, question?
What was the difference again from convert to double to convert to int?
Yeah, good question. The question is, what is the difference between convert to double as opposed to convert to int? Let me remind you by creating this dummy variable here called temp as integer, say for example. All right, so an integer, as you know, is a whole number. A double is a number with a decimal point, right? So the reason why I use convert to double here is because I am placing this data into a double. And so since I'm placing it into a double, I'm going to convert it into a double. Let's say that the person entered a wage of $10.35. And let's just say that I changed this into an int 32. This one right here. Okay, so what that would do is it would take the text from the text box, which let's make believe is $10.35. All right, so if it converts that into an integer, this 35 cents goes away because that's the integer. See, this is the fractional part or the real part. When I do this, when I convert this to a double, then it's going to obtain the $10.35, convert that into a double, which is a number with a decimal point, and place that into here. So it depends on the data type. If it is a double that you intend on putting data into, change it to 2 double. If it's an integer that you intend on putting data into, then you place 2 int 32.
So the int part means integer.
That's exactly right. Very good. Yeah, the int part means integer, which you know means whole number. Good. Other comments or questions? All right, good. That was a good question. All right, let's go to the calculation section. Now, remember, I've got some people who work part-time, full-time, and then I've got some people who work way overtime. So let's do this. If the hourly, or the hours worked rather, is greater than or equal to 40, then, okay, so a person works 40 hours or more. That's what this if statement is saying. All right, if you work 40 hours or more, then what should your regular pay be? What should your overtime pay be? All right, so your regular pay is going to be your first 40 hours. Right, so that's going to be 40 hours times whatever your hourly wage is. Your overtime pay, for example, let's say that I work 45 hours. How many of those hours are overtime hours? 5, right? So anything over 40. Well, how did I get to that 5? Or how did you get to it? You subtracted the number of hours worked minus 40. So the number of hours worked, so hours worked minus 40. Okay, so what that does right there is it tells you how many overtime hours you worked. In general, people typically pay time and a half for overtime work. So we're going to multiply this times 1.5, which means time and a half. Then we're going to multiply this times whatever your hourly wage is. So hourly wage, press enter. So your regular pay is your first 40 hours times your hourly wage. Your overtime pay is however many overtime hours that you worked. Let's say if I worked 45, so 45 minus 40, I worked 5 hours overtime. 5 times time and a half times however much I get per hour, that is going to be my overtime pay. Okay. But it could be that you did not work 40 or more hours. It could be that you were a part-timer. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to type in else if. Else if the hours worked is less than 40, then. So this else statement deals with people who work less than 40 hours. Well, if that's the case, your regular pay is going to be however many hours you worked times whatever your hourly wage is. Your overtime pay is 0. You don't get overtime pay because you worked less than 40 hours for this given week, so your overtime pay is 0. So again, we see the beauty of the if statement allowing us to determine what regular pay and overtime pay is based on the hours worked. That's our criteria. This guy right here. This is our criteria. If the criteria is met such that your hours worked is greater than or equal to 40, here is your your regular pay and your overtime pay. Otherwise, it's something different if you worked less than 40 hours. Well, now I can do this. Now, by the way, let me type something, and I don't want you to type this. I want you to watch the show. Is this necessarily wrong? Your total pay is equal to your regular pay plus your overtime pay. Is it wrong to do this? Let me take this. I'm going to copy this. Again, you're not doing it. You're just watching the show. And I paste it. So you'll see that this line of code and this line of code are exactly identical, and they are in the if portion and in the else portion. So my question is that wrong? No, not necessarily, but that certainly is redundant. And you want to try to reduce redundancy. It looks like this exact same line of code is over here, so why don't you do this? Instead of typing it over here, what I'll do is I'll just simply cut this out of here, and I'll put it after the if statement. See, this is going to get executed regardless if this is true or false. So when you see something like that, don't have the redundant code here and also over here. Instead, place it outside of the if statement, knowing that this must get executed regardless if this is true or if this is true. Okay? So that's called redundancy, and we want to try to remove redundant code. You just simply pull it out of the if statement. Okay, so now you have your regular pay, you have your total pay, you have your overtime pay. Let's display it to the user, this information. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to say LBL rather, dot text. All right, I'll do something like this. Regular pay. We are going to, actually, let me do this. Let me put a colon with a space and then the quotation mark. So we're going to concatenate that with the person's regular pay. Now, I want to show you how to display data with the currency format. So typically you've done something like, convert dot to string. Well, let me flip those around and say regular pay dot to string, and then you'll put an open and close parentheses, but put your cursor right back inside of that parens. See, my goal is to do this. This is a number. Right? Regular pay is a number. As you can see here, it's a double. I need to convert that into a string or to text so that I can concatenate it with this text over here, or this string. But what I sure would like is for it to be displayed in currency format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put quote, currency format, 2 numbers after the decimal point, close quote. So what this thing does, this line of code says display it with currency format. So you know what currency format is? The dollar symbol with 2 numbers after the decimal point. So this will give you a dollar symbol, a period, and 2 numbers after the period. Now, I know we're not finished, but let's just see what happens here when I run the program. I still have to put overtime pay, and total pay. But I just want to give you a demonstration of what we've got so far. So let's say that I run the program, and I'm going to put in some numbers here, such as I work for $10.50 an hour, and I worked 40 hours. Okay, so I hit submit. Notice over here it says regular pay with a dollar symbol, 420, dot, and then 2 numbers after the decimal point, because that's currency, right? It's 2 numbers after the decimal point. Now we're not finished. Next, I want to see underneath here overtime pay, and then underneath that I want to see total pay. So let me close the program. As you can see here, it's running. So I got to close this. This should no longer say running. Now I can go back into editing the code. All right, for this next line of code, it's really this. What do I currently have in the label? And I want to append to it. The word append means add to. So the way that I want you to think of the word append is pretend that we're taking the cardboard tube from a roll of paper towels. And so I'm going to enter in a billiard ball into one end, and then I take another billiard ball, enter it into the end, take another billiard ball, and you can see what happens is I'm adding 2, right? I've got 3 billiard balls inside of the cardboard tube. Now I'm going to enter a 4th and a 5th and so forth and so on. That's what append means. It means add to the output. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this LBL result.text, and you are going to be assigned once again whatever is inside of the label. This is the old value of what's inside the label, and eventually this is going to be updated to a new value of whatever is inside of the label. I'm going to concatenate that with, okay, what I need to do is I need to go to the beginning of the next line. Does anybody remember the code for going to the beginning of the next line? Nice job, VB new line. What that does is it simulates pressing enter on your keyboard. So we should see regular pay on the first line. Now the cursor is blinking in the beginning of the second line, and now I can concatenate to that a string overtime pay, and then I'm going to concatenate to that whatever the overtime pay is, but I want that to be displayed in currency format. So I'll type in OVR, there it is, overtime pay, dot, toString, open and close parens. I'm going to put my cursor right back in there and type in quote C2, close quote, because what this parameter means, as you've just previously seen, is display this thing in currency format, display this overtime pay in currency format, which is a $, and 2 numbers after the decimal point. And then over here, I'll press enter. Now I think, yes, question.
Isn't that redundant? Can't you just put and VB new line and then continue typing whatever?
Over here at the very end?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It would not be redundant. What it is it's taking multiple lines. Redundant means the same thing.
Well, yeah, I mean typing LBO result.text.
So could I continue? Yes, I could. I could take from this point on and putting it over here. Yep, I sure could. Yep. Yeah, nicely done.
Okay. After dot toString, C2 is incorrect.
Well, if you want it displayed in currency format. If you want it displayed in percentage format, then you would put P, the letter P, and then maybe you want 2 numbers after the decimal point, P2. If you wanted 3 numbers after the decimal point, P3, so forth and so on.
And then for currency, is it just US dollars or is it all currency?
Okay, so now that's a good question. The question is this in US dollars or is this in euro, say for example? It depends on where your computer is located. If your computer is located in Europe, then your localization settings on your computer are set to the euro. If you're in Italy, I'm sorry?
From the programmer's computer or the user's computer?
From the user's computer. So if your localization is in Italy, then it'll say lira, say for example. So it depends on your localization settings. Typically, for a computer sold in Europe, it'll have the European settings. Yeah, sure. All right, so let's go to LBL result.text, and I want that to be what is already inside of the label. I'm going to concatenate that with a VB new line, and I'm going to concatenate that with the total pay. So I'll say total pay, and over here we'll say TOT, there it is, total pay, dot toString. Once again, I want that currency style, so I'm going to say C2, close quote, press enter. I'm going to move the code down here, run the program so you can see it. So here's the code. Here's the program. I make $10.50 an hour. I worked 45 hours. Let me go ahead and click submit. So my regular pay is this. My overtime pay is this. If I add these two, my total pay is this. So again, the nice thing about the if statement is that it allows you to take into consideration the number of hours worked by the user and then give you the appropriate values for regular pay, overtime pay, and total pay. All right, so this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. See you next time.